Hello my fellow adopters or foster carers or professionals, my name is Nairi and I'm the adoptive mum of 2 sibling boys, but I was also a foster carer. If you're interested in anything around that, then please hit the subscribe button. Today we're going to talk about trying to protect your relationship when you are fostering or adopting, and first of all I'm going to cover why you might be having trouble with that, why you might be struggling with that. Then I'm going to look at some do's, what you can do, and then I'm going to look at some don'ts, so that's how the video is going to pan out. So the first thing to say is often we kind of neglect our relationships when we're adopting or fostering, because the child just becomes the focus of our world, and that's understandable. But of course, without those nearest and dearest there to support us, then we're really going to struggle as time goes on. So this video was predominantly made to kind of incorporate couples, but actually if you have a relative or a friend who's very close to you, is helping you through the adoption process or is helping you with your adopted or fostered child, then this could also be something that you could consider. So the first thing to say is one of the reasons why sometimes our relationships start to fall apart is that one of you is more invested in the process or more invested in the adoption or fostering once the child is there than the other one is. Now you often find that, I find that when I have queries, people asking me questions, that actually there is often one of you that's slightly more positive about the whole thing than the other, and this can lead to a little bit of an imbalance when the child comes. It can lead to some difficulties in decision making when it comes to the parenting, because actually when things start to go a little bit wrong, then the person who was less invested in the whole process will start to raise more problems, more issues and more doubts around it, which then can knock the person who was more positive, if that makes any sense to you. So that's one of the reasons why things may not go so well as time progresses. The second reason, and probably one of the more obvious reasons, is perhaps you're in a relationship that has always been a little bit turbulent and a little bit argumentative. I don't like to say whether that's my husband and I, but sometimes it can be. I mean, we've been married for over 30 years, but sometimes we tend to, because we're quite strong-minded, it tends to be a little bit more turbulent sometimes than maybe some other relationships are. So you may find that you're already in that type of relationship, and then when the pressure is on, which of course it is on during the adoption or fostering process, or when you have an adopted or fostered child with you, once that pressure is on, obviously it can cause more arguments than you really want, and that can then cause a lot of unrest within the family. So that's the second reason. The third reason, which is probably a little bit more worrying, but it could be that as a couple you've gone for the fostering or adoption to cover up already some real serious cracks in the relationship, some real emotional issues which have not been dealt with, and you're kind of trying to fill that, and you're kind of going through the adoption or fostering process to do that. Now that doesn't mean to say that that's not overcomable. Of course it is. Anything is overcomable, but obviously if those things are not addressed and they're left unsaid, then that can cause bigger problems later on. The fourth reason could be that you're still trying to recover from some loss or trauma or bereavement in the family. So perhaps if you've been trying for children, you still haven't really recovered from that. Maybe if you've had a miscarriage, you haven't recovered from that. Maybe you've lost a close family member, you've not recovered from that. And you've had the specified time before you can go ahead with processes, before you can go ahead with having a child in the home, but you still aren't really recovered from it, and therefore once the process is over and the child is in the home, all that adrenaline, all those things that your hopes and expectations, then there's a little bit of a lull while the excitement kind of fades a little bit, because you've had so much busyness and adrenaline, and then it's a lot quieter and the child's there, then it can be more difficult to process things if you haven't already. So those are just a few things. There could be many other reasons why there are starting to be problems within the relationship. But also what I'd say, this video is for you if there aren't problems in the relationship. If you're not having any issues yet, and you started the adoption process and you're not having issues, or the child's come to you and you're not having any issues yet, this is also to protect you from having those issues later on. Because obviously with fostering, you may have a child for 2 years, or you might be into long-term fostering. With adoption, you're going to end up with your your child for the whole of your lifetime. So at some point you may well need the tips in this video. So my tips for you of what you can do is, it sounds obvious, but do sit down and talk often. Do sit down and make time to talk often, and don't wait for there to be a problem. Don't wait for there to be an issue. Have a time. It could be the end of the week, it could be the weekend, it might be when the child's in bed, or if you haven't got a child yet, to actually sit down, reflect, talk about how you're feeling, how you're doing. That's very difficult for some couples. Some couples don't open out in that way, and I understand that. And it doesn't have to be anything deep. It can just be that you're gonna sit down together, watch a TV program, you know, have a drink together, and then after that just have a little chat. Don't make it that it has to be a date night. I'm not suggesting that in any way. I'm just suggesting sit down and talk often. That's number one. The second is put aside some time, not only for each other, which I've just suggested, but for yourself. Again, it does not have to be a lot. It is probably not going to be. If you've got children in the house, you're not going to have hardly any time. But even an hour a week where you're doing something that you really enjoy, it could just be that you want to pick up your phone and just enjoy that moment. Or it could be that you have a hobby, and it's got to be equal for each other. It's got to be fair that as a couple you make space for each other to go and do something at least one time a week, where the other one allows the other one to do that, and it's not one-sided, that only one of you is doing that and the other one is doing everything else in the home, or one of you is sort of staying behind through the adoption process to do all the paperwork. My next point for you is something that's contentious in our family and always has been. Like, Tim always likes to do everything for ourselves, however busy we are. Like, I can tell you, we have been stretched to the max, and he really finds it difficult to allow other people to do jobs in the house. But if you are able to have someone that you know for free to come in and help you with household chores and jobs, take it. Don't be too proud to take it. If it might need a little bit of finance to do that, so you need a cleaner to come in a couple of times a week and you have that money, then do it. Because actually it's more important to have those jobs done, to put your mind at rest and know that things are taken care of, than for you to be worrying about it. And this can cause issues as well. So if things are left undone in the house, in the garden, chores are getting a long way behind, and let's face it, if you're fostering particularly, you will have very regular visits from social workers, and you will have unannounced visits. You can't allow things to kind of go undone. And in the early days of adoption, you will have social worker visits, and they're not going to be expecting to see the house in chaos, or some unsightly fence where a child could get out, broken down. There's things that have to be done when you're a foster carer or an adopter. My next point for you is think about how you can have respite for the child. Now, if you're in a process at the moment, you may not be able to think that far ahead, and that's fine. But of course, as you identify who your support network is going to be throughout that process, you'll be thinking in terms of who in the end might be able to have the child for a short amount of time. Now, I never recommend that happens too early on in any adoption or fostering process, but obviously you still will need to have respite, and it's really important that you are not too proud again to put that in place when the time is right. Because if you just focus wholly and solely on the child, you will have difficulties in your relationship, whichever relationship that is. Relationships take time. You cannot build a good, strong relationship without having any time together, without having any time to discuss anything, any time to laugh and have fun and do things together. In time, identify who is going to be that trusted person to do some respite for you, whether that be in your home for a couple of hours or whether that be out of the home. And obviously the fostering will be a lot stricter than the adoptive side will be once the child is yours, but it's still the same thing. You still need to think about who can you trust to have the child for you for a couple of hours, and then in the future, if you need to have a quick break, whether it be a day or a weekend away from the child, who could do that for you as well. And I strongly recommend as well that you go places and you do things that are not just child-centred. So once you get to the stage where of course you can have a little respite, you'll be able to do that. But also, again, I think as families in general, sometimes what happens is everything that's organised, everything that's done, every treat that happens is all around the children, and there is no kind of self-care for the adults at all. You learn to do that over time because, as I say, with adoptive families, families, you've got the child there for life, so you need to be able to do that. So now we're moving on to the don'ts. We've had some positives, and now I want to say the things not to do. So the first thing to say to you is don't minimize the effect that some of this might have on your relationship or might be having on your relationship. If you feel that your relationship is kind of slipping away from you a little bit, and the connectivity that you and your partner have, you just don't have that anymore, and you find yourself thinking about the child all the time, worrying about the child, but you know that you and your partner are not supporting each other, don't minimize that. Seek help. When I say seek help, I don't necessarily mean that it has to be relationship counseling or anything like that, because I think if you can spot the signs quite quickly that you're not communicating anymore like you used to, then you can get in quite quickly and do something about it. Hopefully, again, within that support network, there will be a friend, there will be a family member, there will be a trusted professional, if you prefer, that you can just offload onto. Now, those friends that you have, they're rare. You may have lots of acquaintances and lots of friends, but you might have one friend or family member that you can just sit there and offload onto, and they will listen for you for an hour, and then you'll sit and listen to what they have to say. And that's the type of person you might need to do this with to support you and your other half. So what you don't do, though, is share with others how much you're struggling. Go and find somebody else to offload onto and tell them that you think things are falling apart a little bit and your relationship is going down the pan, but not share it with your partner. You need to, first of all, of course, share it with your partner, that you think that you're struggling together, and get that out into the open so that at least a conversation can be had about that, and you can support each other to kind of explore the emotional issues that you're experiencing. Because fostering and adopting is very difficult. It's very emotionally stressful. It's very wonderful at the same time. You do take a knock, not only with yourself, but as I say, with your nearest relationships. One thing I recommend as well, if you're going through the process, especially for either of these two things, is that you don't constantly talk about the child, and you don't constantly talk about the process. So what you can find you do is that constantly talking about fostering and adopting, you're constantly talking about what child you might end up with, and it just becomes all consuming, and you don't allow that little bit of space and time for other things in your life, which includes of course the other person. So try to avoid doing that, and don't lose your own interests, your own hobbies. I've already said this about not making everything child-centered, but this is more about things that you do at the moment if you haven't got an adopted child or foster child with you. And if you have got a child with you, have you had hobbies in the past that you now don't do? Things that you really used to enjoy, that used to give you that therapeutic moment for yourself, a little bit of self-care that you now don't do. And I strongly advise you go and get those things back out again, or do those things, whether that be you want to go outdoors, you have a hobby inside that you no longer do, and try your very best to maintain having that still, because you will need that as time goes on. I really suggest as well that you don't keep going back over the family history and the chronologies. So some of the children that I've cared for have had really horrendous chronologies and histories, and sometimes that can re-traumatize you. So you feel like you're just getting on your feet, you're finding a rhythm with the child and your family, and then you go back and read the notes again, and you get reminded how awful and terrible things are, and it re-traumatizes you. So I suggest you don't do that. And equally, I kind of suggest you don't read too much or do too much training. Now, foster carers will need to do a certain amount of training for sure, but I kind of suggest that you don't overload yourself with information. I know you're watching me right now, but try not to kind of pack too much in, because what happens is you start to overthink everything, and you start to be kind of so filled with information that you almost can't think practically for your own family. Don't let others make you feel inadequate. I've said this on so many videos. It's your family, it's your child if you have a child already, and you need to do things the way that you need to do things. And even when you're fostering and you're given training and examples of how to do things, you still may find that the child that you have does things completely differently. And as you build a relationship and attachment, by the way, I've just posted a video that last week that talks about a deepening attachment and what deepening attachment actually looks like from when you first get the child, and how that progresses into looking more of a deep relationship. But you will get to know your child through that deeper attachment, and therefore you will be able to provide for them. And it's very easy to look at what other people are doing and feel that perhaps you should be doing it differently. But I strongly suggest that you go with your gut instinct when it comes to your child. Hope you found that really useful. I will link a playlist at the end for you about self-care types of issues and topics, and I will also link last week's video for you as well, so you can have a look at that. If you liked the video, give it a thumbs up and please subscribe, and I'll see you on Fly Little Birds.